Joining us now is Alison Burson, a personal injury lawyer at Burson Law, and Dr. Beth McCharles, a sports psychologist and high-performance coach. Welcome to What She Said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, today we're going to try and tackle the topic of bullying and hazing in sports and schools in light of the recent developments at St. Michael's in Toronto. Now, for people who may not be familiar with that story, Alison, tell us what happened.
Well, ultimately, it hit the media everywhere over the past month, and it all around is a very sad story about stories of students within St. Michael's, which is a private school, being hazed and potentially bullied on sports teams as part of an initiation, and ultimately that was videotaped and then sent around or videoed on phones and then sent around through social media. And ultimately, one parent got a hold of it. It was sent to the school. And from there, there's been some very serious fallouts and consequences to the students who were responsible for it or were bystanders, and also obviously devastating to the victims of that act.
I'm interested. You drew a line between bullying and hazing. Legally, are they different things?
Well, not legally. I mean, ultimately, bullying is widely defined in the Education Act and also with respect to the common law. So it can be any type of, whether it be verbal or physical act that's meant to intimidate, harass, demean an individual, and ultimately usually see some sort of power imbalance. And we just seem to maybe associate hazing more with a sporting group. Rather, bullying, you might hear the term more within the group. And maybe Beth has some insight onto the differences that are occurring within both of those.
We should also mention there is an alleged sexual assault here. It's not just intimidation.
Yes.
So yes, Beth, what exactly is hazing? How do you define it?
Hazing really is an act of consent or not consent of someone doing something they're uncomfortable with. So it could be someone saying, come up and say a joke as little as that, and they feel uncomfortable doing that. Or in a team environment, usually there's some examples of dressing up, having to drink a certain amount. It's this sense of pressure of the newbies trying to prove kind of their belonging. And I think that's a culture shift that needs to change.
Now, speaking of a culture shift, I was really surprised. I guess I automatically assumed that this was a boys' thing. This was something that men do. But apparently, when it comes to hazing, female athletes are just as vulnerable. A recent study published by the Canadian Journal of Clinical Sports Psychology found, in fact, that more Canadian female university athletes report experiencing hazing than males. Is that, Beth, just because more women may tend to report something, understand the differences because of their experiences as women, just in general in society? Or is it, in fact, that there's more hazing going on there?
I think a little bit of both. The one thing that to mention is women's sport is growing. Right, we're now playing hockey more and rugby more, and we tend to follow kind of that male culture of hazing.
Yeah, so you say we're picking up their bad habits?
Which is unfortunate, absolutely. So what we need to do is keep that education going and making sure that females understand that.
Well, at bottom line to both of you, what should parents, teachers, coaches do when they suspect something, when they see something happening at a school or off-school property?
From the legal perspective, I'll start with that. I mean, that's if you're seeing an incident arise, the first thing that you have to do is you have to report it. You have to tell the coaches, if it's not a coach, it's a manager, someone within the school or the organization about what you're viewing. And I would even say put it into writing so that that can be passed around to more members or perhaps passed up so that they're aware of the incident, because there may be other people reporting similar incidents with the same individual, the same sports team. That's very, very important to start changing the culture, which is what Beth is talking about.
Should a parent who suspects something let the school know, let the coach know, and also call the police just to make sure?
It depends on what it is. And I think what you're alluding to is how serious the act was. And in that particular case, it was a allegation of sexual assault. So absolutely. If there is an allegation or you've seen something that might involve sexual assault, definitely the police should be informed immediately. Or if there's any risk potentially of a child taking their own life as a result of bullying, that elevates it more than sending an email. But if it is something where it's more a comment or potentially a kind of environment that's developing, I think writing that first to the coach, the manager, because you want to try and change this culture, as Beth is saying, to make it more positive rather than punitive on an individual.
Why don't you tell us how damaging psychologically this is? I mean, I know you could write a book about this, so people understand that it's not, when we used to be told by our parents, it's only words, sticks and stones,
break my bones.
Or boys will be boys.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. I don't, there's something about breeding empathy and people understanding that this can be just devastating.
It can have a lifelong effect psychologically on these young students and athletes, and I think that needs to be aware. And the main thing that we need to do to create a culture shift is that prevention. And, in universities right away, if that happened, you automatic suspension or expulsion, like the team is done for the year. And I think those consequences need to make its way through the high school and maybe even elementary to help them really understand that this is not something that is acceptable.
So for a parent who maybe has a child who is on the sidelines, let's say, you're going to feel, oh, I failed. I didn't do something right. What as parents can we do? What can we tell our children? In terms of being exposed to this, what should they be doing?
Two things. One is making sure as a parent you're asking your child questions at the end of the day. Who did you sit with at lunch? How was your day? Who did you play with? Certain things. And I think usually, especially if they're younger, that bedtime talk is really important. That's when most things come out. But again, is the teachers and the coaches and the administration educating on what is bullying and what is hazing, and really making sure that they have the confidence, talking about the psychological skills, to stand up for themselves, but also that bystander is so important.
But to build that kind of confidence in your children for just general purposes, it is hard on a parent. But when they want to be part of a team, and that seems to be part of the team's culture, surely we have to change that from the inside. But so many of these coaches say, didn't know it was happening. It was a small group. I mean, I don't really understand how it came to be so accepted in the first place. I mean, sometimes it's just wearing something silly, or, for a girl, like exposing your midriff, something you wouldn't do when you were walking around in a public place. And some go to the level of what we've heard out of St. Mike's. So as educators, how do you change that culture within the sports groups?
Well, two things, and I think Allison will speak on that with policy and procedures within the sporting environment.
Yeah. So the first thing is there's twofold. There is a lot more legal consequences as a result of these bullying and hazing, both in the civil system, criminal system, even in the Education Act. So there are very strict consequences now, not just to the students, but to the organizations and the members of the organizations that knew or ought to have known. And that is a big test. Ought to have known. You can't turn a blind eye. And secondly is getting the legal advice and getting the policies and procedures in place so that they are written down so people understand what is accepted, what is not accepted, and that's presented to the coaches as well as the parents, and not just sent around in an email. And from a legal perspective, that's how I would approach that. Okay,
so obviously there's lots of work still to be done. How can people connect with you both?
For myself, if you have any questions, obviously about the law surrounding this or developing a policy, you can reach me at bursonlaw.com.
And for me, if you have an incident or if you want to create that more positive team culture and the education piece, you can reach me at bethmcharles.ca.
ladies, thank you so much for shedding light and giving your insight on something that really is very disturbing to so many parents. And we really have to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.